Awesome. All right. So welcome everybody to the Bergen Trauma Training Center YouTube channel. My name is Maggie Walsh and I'm so excited to be here with everybody. Today we have an awesome special guest with us to help celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month, which is across the month of May. And so I am so glad to welcome Caitlyn Yerves to join us today. And before we jump into having a little conversation, I just wanted to give you all a little background on who Caitlyn is and the awesome person that she is to join us today. So Caitlyn is a yoga and meditation instructor and enthusiast for holistic wellness that encompasses body, mind, and spirit. As a student of psychology and director of communication and advocacy at CarePlus New Jersey, she has been exposed to a number of social issues that create wide-scale pain and suffering. This exposure to the prevalence and impact of stress has fueled her desire to help uncover inner peace through the study and practice of mind-body stress reduction techniques. So with well over 500 hours of training in various aspects of yoga and meditation, Caitlyn teaches how to integrate the practices of mindfulness and relaxation into everyday life to cultivate compassion and explore the intricacies of the mind-body connection. So welcome, Caitlyn.
Thank you so much for having me, Maggie. I'm delighted to be here.
Of course. So why don't we start off by you just talking a little bit about your experience in the mental health field?
Sure. So I figured we'll go backwards in time here. So I'm currently the director of Communications and Advocacy at CarePlus New Jersey, and specifically, I've been working to increase our brand awareness and ambassadors through new marketing efforts for the agency, which has honestly been a lot of fun and utilizes a very weird skill set that I've acquired through the years. I started working at CarePlus in 2014 as an advocacy specialist. And I spent my first few years building our social media presence and supporting the fundraising efforts for the foundation. And again, very fun and a great experience, and I learned a lot. The year before I was offered the job at CarePlus, I actually had gone to a meeting for the CarePlus Foundation Board of Trustees. I'm pretty sure it was the foundation and not the whole board, but it was a big group in the conference room. I did a presentation requesting grant funding for an organization called the Turn a Frown Around Foundation, or TAFA. And not only did we receive that grant funding, which helped us sustain the program for a few years, but I also got a job, which I wasn't expecting. And a big thank you to Joe Mascindero and Tara Augustine for giving me that opportunity at that time. I was still pretty fresh out of college by the time this all happened. I studied psychology at Montclair State University. And the reason I ended up at CarePlus is because I decided to volunteer for TAFA. And I wrote a book about the founder of the organization, and his name is Drew Horn. So he really is an incredible human. I've lost touch with him recently, although I like to think he'll resurface soon. There's a story there. But he, lived with serious and persistent mental illness his whole life. And his mission when I met him was to end loneliness through TAFA and create forever friends and build smile stations. And, we really were like two peas in a pod. Like as soon as I met him, there was like an immediate connection. And when I started working with him, though, that's when I really realized the power of compassion. I had transferred to Montclair State after having a breakdown my freshman year of college. I was at art school in Brooklyn, and just the pressure of that paired with the trauma really pushed me over the edge. I lost my dad earlier that year, and that came on the tail end of many deaths in my family. So I was kind of numb to it and didn't really process it. It was just another death, but it was my dad, and that was a whole strained relationship in itself. I grew up in an unconventional household, really severely impacted, or at least significantly impacted by addiction and mental health conditions, but I didn't understand that until I started working at CarePlus. So when I met Drew, and as I came to know his history, I did reflect on my own suffering, and like what I had been through. And in those moments, my freshman year, where I really, had I talked to someone, they really probably would have said like there was a psychotic break. So between those moments of psychosis and the confusion around that, there was so much pain. But for me, it wasn't a persistent pain. You know, it lasted me a good amount of time. And again, probably would have been diagnosed if I had gone to talk with somebody. But it did take some time and it took a lot of effort, but I did heal my heart and my mind. And in knowing Drew, I realized that people live in that kind of like dissociative thinking patterns and in that kind of delusion consistently. And it was just like a aha moment, where not that it made my pain seem insignificant or not that it dismissed it, but in that profound realization, it just made my pain a little lighter. And Drew had actually told me a story. And again, this is someone with severe mental illness who had been in the psychiatric ward, and his roommate in the ward was so unwell that he couldn't even really control the way he was using the bathroom. And he was just like all over the room. And Drew realized like, wow, this guy's worse off than I am. And that was a turning point for him. And he thought of the quote that I think maybe is Martin Luther King of, you know, you can either you can either light a candle or curse the darkness. And just that idea of kind of being strength-based and the resilience. So long story short, I kind of joke that I stumbled my way to where I'm at now. And it has been an amazing journey. And I could ramble on more about it, but I am working on a book about this whole experience, and I'll share some of that story for there. So.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that and being so open and honest with us about, because everyone's journey into the mental health field is very unique. And I absolutely love how you were influenced and made some really powerful connections that kind of shaped your path and shaped your journey into the mental health world. And now you're even, you know, you have the background in psychology, and now you're doing some creative things for Care Plus. So there's a lot of, I know you said you were at art school in Brooklyn, so it's almost like the two worlds have meshed for you in this job. So that's really powerful. So how did you become interested in yoga and mindfulness, and how does it connect to mental health for you?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said there. But even it's funny what you just said, because, you know, a common translation of the word yoga is union. And so like that, it really has felt for me, especially these last few years, like all of the worlds I exist in are coming into one where I exist in, you know, and it's nice to be able to feel that way and be able to be the same person in all of these different arenas of my life.
Definitely.
Yeah. So my first yoga class was actually in high school with my health teacher, Mrs. Morgan. We would call it MOGA, like, you know, yoga with Miss Morgan. And she was great, you know, and I really only remember the meditation and relaxation part of it. Like I remember her taking us through the rainbow. And again, like I was raised in a not so easy situation. I didn't know it at the time, but having that little break was like such a relief. And I didn't realize how much of a relief it was, but I was like, I like this stuff. And I didn't do much with it, but I really liked it. And over the next few years, I would, you know, do some home practices and stuff with like tapes. But honestly, at first, it was more about losing weight and trying to get comfortable in my skin. And I struggled with body image issues my whole life. So, you know, all the diets, all the exercises, and none of it ever even worked. So by the time I was starting this like home practice with tapes, I was still stuck in this space of not really loving myself. And I would even say, you know, there were parts, especially with my body, where like I hated myself, you know, and it's hard to admit that, but over time and seeing that change has been so powerful. Again, my freshman year of college, that was really a hard time for me. But before kind of the breakdown, I was taking some of the yoga classes that they had on campus. And again, it was nice. I felt very aligned with yoga. And even though I hadn't gone to many classes, it was like, yes, like this is something that makes sense to me. And I'm like, you know, deep in the yoga Kool-Aid. So I'm like lifetimes, you know, this, I've done this before. But by the time summer came and you know, I had the breakdown, I decided to transfer out of art school and go study psychology. This new trajectory made me feel a lot lighter, and I was able to really start a serious yoga practice. And it actually started with energy work for me. I stumbled into like something about the chakras, which are the, you know, the energy system of the body. And it was really an intensive, a great program that I found. It was, you know, one of those funnel things where they give you a free sample and then you like buy the whole thing. But they did this meditation, and it was like the golden rose meditation. And you're just like visualizing this pink rose in your heart, and it's blooming and blooming and blooming. And then it just like explodes this golden light, like all over your life, you know? And that meditation in itself, I think, was a game changer for me. And I scrambled up whatever money I didn't have from like my, you know, my loans and my reimbursement check from college to buy this 7-week series. And it really started to change my life. This is where you start to see the overlap of like the philosophies of yoga with mental health, where even just looking at the 7 chakras and what they address, you know, you start with your root chakra to overcome fear. You know, you deal with the guilt issues in your 2nd chakra, overcoming shame and like embracing your power when you get to the 3rd chakra. And then of course the heart. And I actually remember when I was doing some of this healing, like having a vision of my dad when I was healing my heart chakra. And I had really kind of a bad image of him scarred in my mind because, you know, when he passed away, there was the way he was presented at his funeral was like just not the best way to remember him, you know? And that would be what I would always see. But then I just had this breakthrough when I was healing, and I saw him in like white scrubs with like this purple light around him. And it was like he, you know, healed through my own healing too. And that was really, really powerful. But the heart, you know, releasing the grief again and again and again and again. And then coming up to your throat for your self-expression, tuning into your intuition and being able to trust yourself. And then, you know, the crown is like really your connection to all things. And, you know, there's a little synopsis of what I learned in the 7 weeks, but you can see the overlaps on the dimensions of health. And then as I was learning this, each of those chakras would be paired with different poses. So I would start doing that daily. And this was different. Like I was starting to love myself. You know, there's an embodiment that comes with that. And I wasn't doing the poses to get fit. I was doing them to heal and clear my energy. And I would joke like, this is my chakra meds, you know, because my meditation, and that's what I do. And again, like I was starting to love myself, and like just listening to these tapes, I was on the computer. You know, I would see things change and notice. And it's not the type of stuff where like I initiated something, you know, it's like where the universe starts talking to you and you're like, oh gosh, people are going to think I'm a little wild, but I am. So that's fine. But again, the biggest part, and especially, you know, starting with the chakras, like I try to invite my friends and my family to come learn with it. And they'd be like, yeah, sure. Okay, Caitlyn. But now like everyone's on board. You know, like my mom has a yoga practice. All 3 of my sisters practice. 3 out of the 4 of us are all teachers of yoga and have our certificate. So that transformation for my family, you know, and they're still healing and there's still a lot of work happening for us. But it started with me doing that for myself. And not only did I start moving more regularly, but with that, it's like, it became effortless to drink water, you know, like something as simple as that, and like eat the right food and like be attracted to the right food to eat. So it just starts a snowball effect of health. So really after completing my teacher trainings in 2013 and 2015, and then again and again and again, I really developed a strong and consistent practice. And in yoga, they talk about practice and non-attachment as like the keys to liberation. But it can look different, you know, and one of the teachings is it's not really practice unless it's done consistently for a long period of time and with enthusiasm. And I was like, ooh, like, I'm not really enthusiastic. I don't really want to go do down dog. You know what I mean? But then I expanded my definition of yoga, and, you know, I'll talk about this in the next question. And, you know, I realized that my whole life is yoga, you know, like in this field, if you work for Care Plus, like you come from a place of service, you know, and like that is yoga by another name. And so I'll close this with my teaching from my teacher's teacher, which is, you know, with the magic wand of right attitude, anything can become yoga.
I absolutely love that. And as you were talking a little bit towards the end, what resonated with me was, you know, when I too practice yoga, I'm not a teacher, but I definitely do gravitate to that sort of energy. And it's all about like the work that you're doing on the mat is really to help you face all those things that are off the mat. So really that really sits with you and resonates with you, because it's you know, as you said, you might not enthusiastically do down dog, but the power and the energy that you bring to the mat is the power and the energy that you can bring outside. So it can really have that powerful healing effect. And also another point that, you know, when you talked about that I really loved is that idea of self-compassion, and the a lot of people could want change, could want healing, but until we love ourselves, how can we fully you know, heal? And you know, healing is that lifelong journey. And you know, we might grow in certain ways and develop in certain ways, and as you said, blossom with all that gold sparkle everywhere, which is so incredible. But there's always more, to achieve. So thanks for sharing all of that. So as I mentioned, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and for they always do, NAMI and all of those national organizations for mental illness always do different themes. So this year the theme is called Tools to Thrive, which basically is providing practical tools that everyone can use to improve their mental health and increase their resilience regardless of their personal situation. So I'm just curious, can you give us some advice on how, you know, we can incorporate yoga and mindfulness into our daily lives to improve our overall well-being, and also to speak to any other tools that you think might help build resilience for us?
Yes, definitely. And another thing my teacher says regularly is, you know, do a little something for your own health and well-being every day, and then share that with others. And I think, you know, that's like the synopsis of it. And I say like 5 minutes of breathing or exercise or meditation a day consistently can be really powerful. And getting started with that can be really hard. And I want to come back for a second on what you said about really the physical practice and like what we do on the mat. And it's so true, because I used to, it's that, you know, I'm friends with a lot of the teachers that I've taken classes with, and I'd be like cursing them in my head when they're like, now we're going to do this. And it's, you know, I'm laughing at it as I'm joking or as I'm cursing them in my head. But you do that 6 o'clock in the morning, the rest of the day is a total breeze. And I really can attest to that, because I had a period of time where I had such a consistent practice of actually going and doing the hour of yoga in the morning. And life was easier for me when I was in that zone. And I have fallen off of that a little bit. But again, not that I've stopped doing yoga, because yoga is such a big category of things. You know, so where we're talking about the mat, that's hatha yoga, and that's 1 out of 6 of the branches. And again, so powerful, so accessible. There's YouTube videos for that. And I would just say again, if you're thinking I'm just getting started and I want to build a consistent practice, because that is the key, the things you want to think about with hatha yoga, the breath is the most important and most powerful thing. So for me, what I do every day, and even if it is only 5 minutes, is I do 3 different breathing exercises that I've learned through my teachers. And that, you know, is even more, sometimes even more healing and powerful than doing the whole, you know, the physical practice. But it still falls into that category. Beyond that, when you're doing an hour of yoga or 15 minutes or whatever, usually you're hitting on this next point that I have. I might get a visitor from my cat here. Which the big thing I really emphasize is moving your spine in the 6 directions that it's meant to move. That in itself, and it again could take less than 5 minutes to do that, it nourishes every organ in your body, because each of the vertebrae of the spine connect with different organs and different systems. So that's a big thing. I really, really like, my #1 recommendation, if you're not into starting a yoga practice, do the movements of the spine paired with your breath. And then if you want to take it further, also move every single one of your joints, because that's where the synovial fluid is generated. So when you're moving that, not only does it keep your joints happy, but it creates the fluid that nourishes every tissue of an organ and fiber of your body. So the physical practice, the hatha yoga, is so important, but it was really designed to get the body into a healthy state. So when you sit to meditate, you can. You know, every time I start with a class, especially with maybe not like traditional yogis, is I'll be like, you know, who has meditated? And you'll see a lot of hands go up, and then it's like, who thinks they're good at meditation? And all the hands go down. And it comes back to the self-compassion that you were talking about. there's such a power to equanimity, which is kind of that undisturbable peace. But it's like, it comes and it goes, it's not like you get there and you stay there forever. In the same way you said what we do on the mat prepares you for life, it's actually the same thing in a seated meditation. Because when you sit to meditate and I'm like, okay, I'm going to say Om Shanti for 20 minutes. Yeah, right. But that's right. So it's like, I sit and it's like, Om Shanti. And before I even get to that second Om, if I get there, I'm thinking about like what I ate yesterday, or like my cat, I hear it playing with a toy, or like whatever it is, And so most people see that and are like, I failed and I'm not good at meditation. The same friend that I would curse when he was teaching me yoga with loving kindness, he would say that when you catch your mind wandering and you bring it back, it's like a bench press for the mind. So it's not a failure because you caught yourself, and then you come back to the moment and you do it again and again and again. And that time that you take is a vacation with yourself. It's not a time to judge yourself. You're watching the mind. The mind is like a puppy. It's just so excited, and it wants to run, or this kitten too, also like the mind. And eventually though, once it kind of does everything it needs to do, it comes and cuddles with you, and it's so sweet. But we have to be able to detach a little bit. So and I'm not going to go through each of the branches of yoga, but one major resource I would recommend is the Yoga Life Society. That's where I study. That's with my teacher, and they offer so many resources. All of them are donation based. And you can really dive into the depths of what yoga has to offer. But the main teaching I guess I would share with that is, it's the second from the Yoga Sutras, which is that yoga ends the misperception that the seer or the self is the same as the mind's whirling, twirling excursions of thought. So I'm going to break that down just a little bit. Whirling excursions of thought. How accurate is that to describe the way the mind is? It's always, right? That's just what it's always going to do. Our suffering comes from thinking we are that. So through meditation, we kind of create a buffer between ourselves with big S and that like little self that's running around with the mind. And when you witness the mind that way, you start to create a little more identification with like the spirit within yourself. And we have this body and mind to use and learn and grow with. But if we get caught up in all of that, we tend to miss the point of what life is really trying to tell us and what's right in front of us. So that's, believe me, that there's a whole like 7 pages on just that one sutra and the depths of it. But I think what that does, it's like, if you think of the ocean, and if you're at the surface level of the ocean, you're going to get pushed around by the waves, So with practice, yoga is like being able to go deeper and deeper into the ocean. And when you get down there, you're not affected by the waves anymore. You're still in the ocean, but you're not being pushed around by the waves. So again, the biggest thing is understanding that the reason I wanted to say that is this text and the teaching goes back thousands of years. So it's not new for human beings to have this kind of distraction and suffering, but there's also paths that show us how to overcome it. And there's so many different paths. The teaching that we follow is truth is one and paths are many. So whatever way you get there is fine. We're all aiming towards that peace though. So I would say anything you do where your mind can be focused, whether it's reading or writing or singing or cleaning your turtle tank, like whatever it is, but you're just there cleaning the dishes, washing your hands, that can be meditation too. And every single effort, not even second, but less than a second that you're doing that and aligning with peace, you don't lose that, and it makes it easier the next time you choose to tune into that vibration. So that's my little ramble for that. I hope it makes sense.
Of course. And I really appreciate it because a few things really sat with me when I was listening to you. And the first one is that you can start small. Sometimes when we think of yoga and meditation, you're like, I have to be on a yoga mat for an hour, or I have to sit and say Om for 20 minutes. Like, to anybody that can seem really overwhelming. But as you said, we can start off with just a minute of breathing in the morning, or mindfully washing our hands, whatever it may be. So it's accessible to everybody. And there's no equipment needed. And it's a great mental health tool. And another thing that I liked in what you said was that idea of being non-judgmental, because I think a lot of people are very discouraged in the beginning of this isn't working for me. I'm too uncomfortable. And for some people, yeah, it is, especially, when we use trauma as a lens, looking at mindfulness, it can bring up a lot of trauma histories for people. So it can be a really intense journey. And at the same time, it's important to give yourself that loving kindness, that grace, as you mentioned, and say, yes, my mind wandered to what I'm eating after this, and now I'm bringing it back. And just acknowledging that is being mindful. So those are some great things that you shared with our listeners. So I really appreciate that. And lastly, we like to ask this question for all of our guests is, in your opinion, what allows someone to overcome a trauma history?
Great, thank you. Tying it back a little bit to what I was just saying, and I mentioned the Yoga Life Society, and that's one of my spiritual communities. I have a few. Care Plus is a spiritual community too, in a way, but really the key there is that I surround myself with like-minded seekers. We are very different. Like nothing but yoga connects us. You know what I mean? Like some of us here would never meet each other if it weren't for like walking this path together. But I think that's essential, especially for supporting kind of overcoming trauma. Some of the stuff that we go through, again, it's like being on the mat. You're kind of like, yoga, one of the teachings too is suffering for the sake of purification, which I think is similar to what you were just saying with trauma, like leaning into that so you can kind of get through it. And so another little like abbreviation, and then I'll go a little more into the trauma piece that my teacher uses, is vulnerability, inconceivability, and availability. And like those three words can really set you up to be present to what life has to offer. And the vulnerability piece is kind of being open that the pain's going to come and you're going to have to lean into it sometimes. I'm going to come back to the I for inconceivability, but the availability is really showing up. Right. So it's like being ready for things maybe not to go how you want, but still showing up. But in the middle there, the inconceivability is like where the magic happens. And it's like, no matter what the pains of life have put you through, and they do, again, not to dismiss that, but there's so much beauty around us, and even something like, you look at nature and the fact that, first of all, we share like 50% of the same DNA as bananas. You know what I mean? Like that's bananas. And you wouldn't even think, if aliens came down from outer space, they would think we're all related to the trees. You know what I mean? Not just humans. So being able to stretch the mind and hold space for kind of that grace that you mentioned, and that like the world can surprise you in positive ways, and that there is intelligence in everything. One example is that when a mother's breastfeeding, the communication between her breast nipple and the baby's saliva actually generates the nutrition the baby needs to come through the breast milk. Right? Wow. And that's the kind of stuff that we miss, and especially like this last year, like we had to not only lead into our own personal trauma, but like this actual trauma that's happening in the moment that we're in, whether you're watching the news or not, you're feeling it. And then the historical trauma connected to that. You can't ignore that and just lean into everything that's great and wonderful, because that's like avoided. It's the balance of both. How do you hold both things? And a lot of times yoga kind of gives you that bandwidth to hold those types of paradoxes. So I would say that really to maintain that and move through things, resilience, support, community, kindness, compassion, those are all definitely key. But it doesn't, like the trauma doesn't go away. You know what I mean? I saw this great illustration that was like, a box with a little button. And at first, it's like a huge bubble in the box, and it's like it bounces around and it just keeps hitting the button. And that's your grief when you're just getting started. It's huge, so it's always going to trigger that pain. Over time, your grief may shrink, but that button's still going to be there. So you never know when it's just something's going to hit it and the pain comes back. So I think that's important to understand. And like for me personally, I joke again that it took me 10 years, but I finally started therapy in this last year, and it's been incredible. Because sometimes the holistic approach isn't enough. When I first started working with Drew and writing his book, I didn't really understand why he needed medication. And now I was like, oh, right, I get it, and through the years, same thing with so many different relationships in my life. and I think that's important too, because so many people turn to yoga, to mindfulness, to meditation, and expect that to be the end all for their wellness. But like, you do need the other things too. And life presents you with different situations where you need to have different tools in your belt to respond to them. And honestly, when I tell people, you know, I'm reconnecting with people from my past because I'm in therapy, and you know, and I joke about 10 years and they laugh because they get it. You know, most people are doing that same thing. Most people are carrying around the trauma. And it's so easy to dismiss your suffering when you look at the world today and see the pain that people are in. But that doesn't make it go away. Again, so it's really better to listen to what the trauma is trying to tell you. And that's where the union, kind of where we, circling back to where we started, where the yoga comes into it. You know, there's really great studies about embodiment, self-embodiment, you know, and self-regulation through embodiment. So again, yoga creating that resilience to the stress, resilience to the fear, then to be able to lean in to those feelings. And, you know, like my favorite practice is just when I just get to lay there in a restorative posture, and it looks so easy, but it's not. You know, because that's when all that stuff comes up, and that's when you know, the trauma that you're holding in your muscles, you know, starts to be unwound, and starts to heal. But this is my kind of most important thing I always like to say to people, as to why these practices are important, is because your healing, so your peace, your feeling of belonging, of worthiness, of love, that is a gift to the world in itself. So you don't even need to do anything with it. You know, you don't need to teach yoga. You don't need to do any of that. Just being in that vibration for yourself lifts your frequency, and it lifts the whole world around you with it. And like, that's not poetry. Like, this is real. Like, there's science behind this stuff now. And that's what's so cool. And, you know, again, it's like, I've been coming into a place of owning it more and not like making it wishy-washy, because it's so powerful, because I benefit so much and I'm a different person. And so to kind of get past this idea that yoga fits into one box when it can be so expansive, and you don't even need to call it yoga. Ultimately, what we're all talking about is healing and kind of returning to our sense of peace and belonging and worthiness in this world. So again, the overlaps of trauma-informed care and yoga and mental health, it really all comes together, and it's just about meeting yourself where you're at, you know.
You said all of that so beautifully, and I love how we kind of started off with that idea of union, and now we're ending our conversation with that. It's really powerful, and you know, I hear in a lot of what you're saying, the idea that healing is a journey, as we talked about, and it's very different for everybody. So what might work for you might not work for somebody else, and just encouraging, you know, everyone who's listening that that's okay. So it's finding the supports that you need for you, whether it's, you know, seeing, like you said, a medication, a therapist, yoga, running, whatever it may be that you gravitate towards. It's important to find what works for you. And mental health isn't a one size fit all kind of thing. We have to embrace who we are. So thank you so much, Caitlyn, for sharing all your insight, wisdom, knowledge, and being really vulnerable and raw with us, so that we can really connect with the people that are listening.
Thank you, Maggie. Again, truly my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And everybody who's listening, just remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we hope you have an awesome day. Thanks so much for joining.